Iridian warbird has violated the neutral zone in pursuit of a scout ship. The fugitives may be seeking political asylum, but as yet we have been unable to confirm their intentions.
So, we've already taken a look back at the first two Star Trek adventure titles released for DOS based on the original series of Star Trek, but today on Ancient DOS Games, we're going up a few decades of lore with Star Trek The Next Generation: A Final Unity. This wasn't actually the first officially licensed Next Generation game for PCs, but the devs decided to go all out with this one, packing a massive amount of dialogue and FMV onto a single CD, 2 if you're in Europe, and putting out a ridiculous number of copies, to the point where once this game had been out for a while, it was often found dirt cheap or in bargain bins just on account of the sheer quantity of these things out there. But now that I've sat down and played through the entire thing, I'm kinda not sure what to think about it as a whole, given that what's here feels both overbuilt and underdeveloped. Overbuilt in the sense that there's 512 sectors of space you can technically explore, each with its own defined solar systems and planets. There's an entire 3D battle engine, you got full-blown engineering, repair, and power distribution mechanics, even the ability to define your own away teams for each mission, with multiple ways to reach successful conclusions depending on who you bring down. And yet, despite all of that, the game has a surprisingly rough feel to it, as though it wasn't quite polished as much as it could have been. Not to mention some of the stupidest Walking Dead situations possible, thus facilitating the need to keep multiple saves going in case you screw yourself over. I mean, really, the game's not bad, it's just awkward. Once you've adapted to its weird way of doing things, you'll do alright. But until then, it's quite the odd experience, trying to figure out what it is the game is demanding of you in each moment. Also, the game has a tendency to crash, especially when switching between modes of gameplay or cutscenes, so again, another reason to keep multiple saves going. Or heck, even the devs knew about that, and recommended players save and restart anytime the game felt like it was starting to chug along.
Go to Red Alert. A Romulan warbird is on sensors.
Targeting Romulan warbird.
Star Trek The Next Generation: A Final Unity was developed by Spectrum Holobyte, and while they self-published the game in North America, it was published through Microprose in the European market, all back in 1995. And it's effectively a one-player adventure/action game, as the adventure components clearly take center seat, but there are action components as well, which the player must take command of in order to survive. I mean, yes, the game has ways to not have to take part in the action segments, but then it's 100% luck whether you survive or not. Something we'll be going over later for sure. It supports VGA 320x200 256 color graphics, as well as SVGA 640x480 256 color graphics. But also, the game curiously supports both 320x200 and 640x480 running in 15-bit or 16-bit high color modes, which only actually benefits the FMV cutscenes, which look better that way, as the raw gameplay is done entirely in 256 colors regardless. As for audio, it supports a decent array of audio devices, though it's important to note that there's a lot of pops baked right into the game's sound effects, which aren't going to go away no matter how your audio is set up. And a small price to pay for the massive amount of compression they needed to pull off to fit all of the dialogue they did into this thing. As for its current release date, the game's still commercial and has yet to show up on digital storefronts, but grabbing physical copies is incredibly simple, as they made a ton of copies of this thing, so it's really easy to find them, even fully boxed, for surprisingly low prices. Loose CDs can go for as cheap as a couple bucks, while fully boxed copies tend to sell for around the $10 mark, give or take. Now, even sealed copies rarely break the $25 mark unless some speculator is trying to gouge for it. But really, even the speculators know this game's far too common to try that nonsense. Even the collector's edition often only goes for between $25 and $40. Maybe because when it comes down to it, the collector's edition is actually kinda dumb. Partly because, again, they made tons of copies, but also because they're supposed to be individually numbered, yet I've seen evidence of there being 2 different numbering sets. Yeah, if you decide to grab the collector's edition instead, don't pay the serial number any mind because it's really not worth worrying about. Though, speaking of the collector's edition... Okay, so this segment is entirely unscripted because, as you can see here, I have the collector's edition of this box. And this one is actually totally sealed. So that's why it's all shiny and everything. And you might be thinking, well, it's a collector's edition, you shouldn't be opening this because it's like gonna be valuable. No. Okay, so right down in this little corner here, I have to turn it sideways because this thing's massive. You're going to see a little sticker. I'm going to try to align it there. Not good at this. But yeah, that sticker there, I know, it seems like a low number. Like, that. What is that again? 00573? Yeah, well, guess what? They made 30,000 of these. So, these aren't exactly rare. And I went online looking, and there's one that's a low number like this one as well. It's being sold for like 25 bucks. So, yeah, these are not valuable because they made so many. And we're still, that's a 5-digit serial number there. Well, yeah, they made 30,000 of these with 5-digit serial numbers. You want to know what else? There's more of these that have 6-digit serial numbers, and I don't know how many of those they made. So they must have made at least a few tens of thousands, because I've seen numbers that go pretty high on those. So yeah, so there's other things here too. So what's going on with this box is there's a special plastic piece in here. And so this is the actual game section here. And then there's like a big plastic part inside that's holding this special... I'm sorry for hitting the cam. This special like LCD... This is really hard to show because of how big this is. It's like this LCD thing. It's supposed to have like some kind of... It's like a pin. It's supposed to have an animation on it. I doubt the batteries still work, but maybe I'll have one that fits. And then let's see. So we got the top part there. We got the back side, which is... pretty typical stuff, showing the... I think this part here is what's normally shown on the box, and then this is all the collector's edition stuff. So there's more in here than just what was mentioned. And I got the system requirements on the bottom on a sticker that's, I believe the term is Actorot for what's going on there, as made popular by the fact that Atari 2600 cartridges made by Activision have that same sort of modeling going on with their stickers nowadays. That's why they all look very bad. So, yeah. Anyways, so I guess it's time to open this. I've got my scissors this time. I know in the past sometimes I've used whatever I had lying around, but this time I'm actually going to cut through the plastic appropriately, which I have now done. So now we just take the plastic off. And again, this is really difficult to film because... This is a very big box. Okay, so the plastic is off. Not doing any cuts here, hopefully. I know my camera doesn't like to record beyond like 10 minutes at a time. But, okay, so the plastic's off, so let's open this up. Yeah. Again, I'm not super concerned because these are not very valuable. Okay. But the box isn't in the best of shape anyways, so... Okay, let's take that off there. And there's... Oh, wow. Okay, so this is actually pretty thick cardboard. And yeah, there's nothing super special in the cardboard there. But yeah, as I was saying, there's like this big plastic piece here that has the actual game in... Like, this is the box for the game. And we got the little LCD pin here. So yeah, I like this proper pin on the back there. Not sure if I'm going to be able to get this working. So I can't get this working right now for this unboxing segment, and sorry for the cut, because I needed to look at the back. Yeah, the back doesn't have any instructions on the battery that goes inside, so I'm going to have to look into that. If I have a battery that I can put into it, I will put a stinger at the end of this video after the credits showing this in action. But unless that happens, that's not going to happen. Anyways, so the rest of this here. So we got the game box itself, which is this plastic shell. And then I think it's, yeah, it even has, yeah, that's interesting. It has the, hard to see, but it has the serial number, matching serial number right on the back of the plastic. And it says here, of 30,000. So I have to wonder, for the 6-digit ones, what that of number is. Because it's going to be 30,000 of these, plus however many more they made of the 6-digit ones. So if anyone has any information about that, please let me know, because I can put that into the video description. So it looks like the way you open this here is with these plastic tabs up top. This is just, oh. Just goes like that. Well, that's weird. Like, the way this looks, the way the plastic looks here, it almost seems like there's a box under here, but no, this is just a label that looks like the box. So inside we get the manual, which is, well, it's a decent sized manual. Let's see. Oh, it's actually full color inside. That's neat. Looks like it's about a little over 70 pages. Okay. Now let's see what else we got in here. We've got this red alert thing on yellow paper, for whatever reason. Looks like installation stuff regarding installation in case you have problems. And then an installation and loading guide right there. The CD itself, that's kind of important. And the CD itself is actually shrink wrapped. We got an official strategy guide thing here. Now looking at the back of the card, the strategy guide was $20. And then obviously we've got the warranty registration thing to mail in. And then we've got the backside of the plastic. Okay. And also if we look under the plastic base here, this big plastic base that you can barely see, again, it's so hard to keep things in frame here, we have this envelope. It's just a very nondescript envelope. I believe this is supposed to be like a poster or something. So, yeah, a poster. I mean, it technically is, but this is like the smallest poster ever. What does it say on the back? Oh, just the artwork credits. Okay, yeah, smallest poster ever. But you know what? For a poster that was this small, at least they kept it protected in an envelope and left it at the bottom of the box where it could stay nice and flat and not get creased or anything. So props for doing it. Props for doing that right. So yeah, I guess it's time to actually take a look at the game proper, because I'm probably going to put this segment in the middle of the video as opposed to the beginning, because it's a bit rambly and there's a lot going on here. So yeah, let's actually get to the gameplay of this.
Captain's log, stardate 47111.1.
Now, normally I would do a segment about the story next, but this game has next to no backstory at all. In fact, as soon as you start it up, you're immediately thrust into the start of an episode, as it were, much like if you were watching the TV show, though with odd CG-rendered cutscenes instead of live action. Well, actually, as awkward as this CG looks, it's surprisingly good for its age, beaten out only by the most advanced CG of the time seen in TV shows like Reboot, though you do get the full proper title sequence of the television series along with the proper theme song, which is more than can be said for a lot of games which started life as TV shows or movies. In any event, you're basically taking command of the entire crew of the USS Enterprise, and will be faced with a variety of missions over the course of the game, which all culminate together into a desperate search for something called the Unity device. Now, before beginning the game, or at any time while on the Enterprise, you're allowed to set your difficulty level as either Ensign, Lieutenant, or Captain. However, this barely does much of anything. Basically, it determines the default delegation state for tactical and engineering, which you can flip at the push of a button, though which resets to default every time you enter combat, so you gotta be aware of that. And it determines how much control you get over sending down away teams, either giving you a preset team and beaming them down right away, giving you a preset team but allowing you to make changes, or giving you no assistance with this procedure whatsoever. The beginning of the game also gives you your first taste of how this whole experience works, as more often than not, there are multiple solutions to every problem. Well, your initial problem is that you're faced with refugees fleeing their homeworld, seeking asylum in Federation space, who have been chased down and put into a tractor beam by their pursuers. Now you can immediately go for diplomacy, try to disrupt the tractor beam before anything else, show force with a burst of phaser fire, or even just flat out massacre the ship and then deal with the refugees afterwards. Heck, the game even has a contingency in place if you decide to kill the refugees by destroying their ship before beaming them aboard, which again goes to show just how much thought was put into this game's progression. It doesn't take long, though, before you get to your first real mission, which has you beaming down to a research station of sorts. Now, the bulk of the game takes place with away missions, whereby you can control each individual member of your away team and have 4 commands you can use with them: look, use, talk, and walk. with the use option also doubling as a pickup option for picking up items. The talking to members of your team can give you hints as to what you should be doing, but for the most part, it comes down to your typical adventure game progression of solving puzzles and using inventory items. Now, speaking of the inventory items, that's one thing that feels severely awkward, is that you have 6 inventory slots at the bottom, yet can carry a seemingly infinite number of items, with the scroll buttons being placed in the middle of the inventory, splitting it into 2 halves, which really is just one section which scrolls. Now true, in some missions you barely pick up much of anything, but there's a couple missions where your inventory is going to get really cluttered before too long, and unfortunately, there's no way to really sort the items you have. Sitting above the inventory is your phaser power selector. Again, this has clearly been overdone, as you can adjust your phaser power between one of many settings, but as far as the gameplay is concerned, all that matters is whether the strength is low, medium, or high. You can also click on the comm badge to beam back up to the Enterprise in case you feel you can't complete your objectives properly with your current team and need to set up a different team to continue the job, though there are times when contacting the Enterprise gets disabled. And really, by this point, it feels like I've already gone over the basics and could just end the review here. But the game has so much more depth and nuance that there's still plenty more specifics to talk about. Well, let's go back to the transporter room for a moment. The way this has been done is that you need to double-click on crew members to add them to the away team. But what if you change your mind about having someone on the team and want to change them out? You have to double-click on the crew member themselves as they're standing on the transporter pad to have them leave. You've also likely noticed by this point the little gauge next to each crew member and are thinking, oh, that's their health. And you're kind of right, but also kind of not. The way crew member health works in this game is that if a crew member falls into the red zone, they faint and slowly regain health back into the green, then get back up. Or if you have a med kit with you, then Dr. Crusher in particular can restore a crew member to full, or any other crew member with the med kit can restore a crew member by 25%. However, as far as I was able to figure out, it's not possible to actually die unless your entire away team goes down all at the same time. Besides, there's surprisingly few threatening things in the game, and if you're doing things even remotely correctly, the amount of times you'll pull out a phaser or actually get injured is very small. One of the more insipid quirks, though, has to do with the tricorder. And yet the crazy thing is the only reason it's insipid is because they've actually been treated to behave like how they're supposed to behave, unlike how they're typically used in an episode of the show. But normally, the tricorder is thought of as a scanning device and as a device which can send signals to things, and while those aspects do come into play in this game, the tricorder's primary purpose is to record. Thus, you will often scan something, get a recording of it onto the tricorder, which you can look up again at any time you want, but more pertinently, sometimes to make sense of the data you record, you have to beam back up to the Enterprise first, at which point the tricorder data is loaded into the ship's computer and more thoroughly analyzed. Then you can look up the analysis using the library computer, which is accessed from the ops console on the bridge for some odd reason. And then, once you see the information you need, you can beam back down and continue with your mission. Yeah, I think this is a good lead-in regarding how awkward this experience can get. As another example, during away missions, it's a given that you should be talking with your crewmates to get an idea of what you should be doing. But if you try this while up on the Enterprise, 90% of the time, all they do is tell you to contact Starfleet instead of commenting on the present situation. Yet the other 10% of the time, you actually do need to talk to your crewmates on the bridge to make progress. Another thing you need to be exceptionally careful of is that if you're in the midst of an encounter with a potentially hostile target and manually go to the tactical station, Riker will immediately call for red alert and everyone starts fighting each other. Thus, you need to be sure never to actually go to the tactical station unless you fully intend to start shooting. One thing I am very thankful of, though, is that despite the way the game's been made to feel, and despite the fact that there's a passage of time being emulated, you're going to notice that the current stardate is never shown anywhere. Essentially, even though there are timed events in the game, they're all timed relative to something you just did and not to any sort of global countdown. For instance, if you're waiting for a response to a hail, you actually do need to wait, sometimes for 10 or 20 seconds before you get a response. Keeping in mind that time doesn't pass while accessing things like the transporter or library computer. This means you can take the game entirely at your own pace, and really don't need to worry about getting things done as fast as possible to make some arbitrary deadline. Theoretically, it may be possible to beat the game without ever going to a starbase, but you've only got so many photon torpedoes on hand, and once you burn through them all, you're going to need a restock. This brings us to astrogation, as it's referred to in this game, even though Star Trek has always called it navigation, where you're able to see a 3D map of the particular region of space you've been assigned to, and can select coordinates to plot a course to. And this is handled by using special buttons to move your 3D cursor, as opposed to clicking directly. Though clicking directly can work, you might want to stop the thing from spinning first though. Now, every location has a sector coordinate from 000 to 777. Every sector is reduced down to a 20 by 20 by 20 grid, where each unit is 1 light-year distance, and when you visit a specific solar system in that grid, you'll get a list of the planets and moons present, and can choose a specific place to visit. Though with sections of space not mapped by Starfleet, you won't know what's present until you actually visit the sector. The level of complexity here in astrogation is kinda intense and intimidating, and opens up a breadth of exploration that's completely unnecessary and also doesn't have much to showcase anyways. Thus it's impressive this is even a thing. Now funnily enough, this level of exploration was also present in the Next Generation games originally released for the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, though those games distilled the exploration down to a list rather than a 3D star chart. Regardless, most of the time, you're just going to automatically plot courses to where you need to go, so while you don't use astrogation manually often, the option is there. And by the way, one thing I was fully prepared to complain about in the away missions is that the amount of walking you typically have to do is staggering. I mean, just look at this. Eventually I realized there's gotta be a way to speed this up, and sure enough, all you do is hold down a shift key, and yes, everything goes way faster. Good thing I found out about that sooner rather than later, or I might never have completed this thing. Actually, if not for keeping multiple saves going, I could have easily been screwed at several points along the line, as the game does have the potential for hitting Walking Dead scenarios, despite the fact care seems to have been taken to avoid this, as each Walking Dead scenario I came across was actually really stupid. For instance, here on this planet, you ultimately get a special key to a vault which has 6 items in it, and you're allowed to take 3 of those items. No matter what you take though, even if it's nothing, if you close the vault at any moment, you cannot open it again. You won't have the key anymore. And there's no way to get a new key, meaning you somehow have to know exactly which items to pull the instant you see them, since yes, it's 3 very specific items you need to continue to make progress, which ultimately leads to, one of the most annoying puzzles I have ever seen in any adventure game ever. Basically, you constantly play different musical recordings which change the layout of the floor panels, and if you screw up, you fall, take damage, and have to start over. It's not that it's hard, it's just way more effort than a puzzle this simple should take. Also, I find it hilarious that not only does Worf know what a paperclip is, but that somehow no one else does. I mean, it's not like the crew of the Enterprise has never encountered books before, so they clearly know what paper is. Whatever. The story does what it wants, and while the writing is decent for the most part, it occasionally feels a bit off, though never egregiously so. And one last thing I want to comment on before we move on though, near the end of the game, your crew members give you ideas towards how you might find the Unity device. Data's idea in particular is the only one you can act on automatically, and he's confident that what he's suggesting can be done successfully. Yet if you follow his advice, you'll see the Enterprise go to warp, and then it's instantly game over. This is the only instance in this game of a crew member being confident and yet also completely wrong, and it's freaking Data? Across all 7 seasons of Next Gen, I can count the number of times he's been wrong about something on one hand.
You know as well as I that our ships are evenly matched. A fight is in nobody's best interest.
Unfortunately, despite this game's emphasis on the away missions, it does have a solid amount of combat as well, and the combat in this game is not good, which is a shame given the sheer quantity of effort which was put into it. There are 2 main issues with the combat, which I'll go over in a bit, but let's first talk about how exactly it even works. Firstly, at the start of combat, you need to make sure the alert status is red, you need to make sure the shields are up, and you need to make sure you have your weapon locks enabled. Next, you can control the ship in one of 2 ways, either directly by using the numeric keypad to pilot the ship and fire weapons, or you can use the tabs at the side to select weapons to use as well as maneuvers to perform. And while piloting the ship with the numeric keypad is way more reliable, the default controls kinda suck since the left and right directions are assigned to roll instead of yaw. Unfortunately, pressing F1 lets you change the controls however you want, so you can fix these defaults to make more sense and give yourself much better control over the ship. But yeah, you have to get used to manual combat. There's no way around it, because for the most part, your adversaries are going to be evenly matched. Meaning, if you leave it up to delegating Worf to do the fighting, given the exact same AI that your opponents are using, it's going to be a 50-50 shot whether you survive or not. Unfortunately, the AI is also really bad at its job, and given that you have multiple shield and weapon aspects to work with, taking manual control allows you to more effectively make use of all of your shields and weapons, allowing you to keep your weakened shields faced away from the enemy while rotating through all of your weapons to do as much damage as you can as fast as possible. Well, that said, the game is also very bad at conveying the status of everything. For one thing, you can't tell how fast your impulse drive is set to, and the star field doesn't move. Thus, you have no sense of speed at all, other than a tiny little number which is telling you your absolute speed that you're moving, not your throttle speed. Also, you have no way to see both your own shield status and your opponent's shield status at the same time, though any weapons which get knocked offline will turn red. This kind of leads into another of the main failings of this battle engine, in that if you take an unshielded hit, you're going to lose one or more systems in an instant and have a high chance of just flat out being destroyed. This is why it's so important to rotate through your shield, so that no one shield goes down and lets an attack through, given how incredibly damaging a single attack can be if the shields don't block it. Likewise though, the same holds true for enemies, and I've occasionally won fights against Romulan warbirds just seconds after they've begun because of this misbalancing.
Dr. Hyun Forsh knows more about this creature than anyone else. Let's listen to her plan.
Overall, Star Trek The Next Generation, A Final Unity is a very ambitious game which does a whole lot more than it really should have, lacking polish in a lot of places where it really needed it. Well, this doesn't make the game bad by any stretch, but it does make it awkward to play if you've never played it before. I mean, cripes. One of the more hilarious bugs I ran into is that if you're in a solar system at a particular planet and try to warp to another planet in the same solar system, you're never going to get there. You're going to be cruising along at warp speed forever. You have to lay in the course under impulse power, and then you'll actually go there successfully. Also, I had this thing crash on me about 6 times over the course of 12 hours of gameplay. I mean, really, I get why they went as overboard as they did, as they wanted players to be able to sort of plot their own course through the game, as it were. And while the game's not hard, it really doesn't hold your hand at all and demands some very odd decision making compared to what you might be used to with similar adventure titles. It's absolutely worth playing if you're a Star Trek fan, and even if you're not but still enjoy adventure games, then you may find something to enjoy here, given its incredibly imaginative visuals across most of the experience. You just also have to be prepared for the less polished parts, and that may or may not be a deal breaker depending on how well you're personally able to deal with such things. So this explains a few things, as my first time trying to play this game was on my Pentium 120 computer way back in the latter half of the 90s, and yet despite that being a perfectly normal computer setup at the time, this game is very speed sensitive, going way too fast on even some period correct hardware. To that end, you need to set a surprisingly low fixed cycles count when running this game in DOSBox, with 640x480 16-bit color. I found the best setting with that video mode to be 30,000 cycles. And again, there's a lot of pops baked into the audio itself, so don't be surprised if you can't seem to get the audio to sound just right. It's just always going to sound off because of that. Anywho, that'll be all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next up, 2 Saturdays from now, on June 8th, will be a filler, and it's probably not going to be anything too crazy, given that I have some important stuff I have to tend to outside of ADG between now and then. But still, make sure to stay tuned to see what small topic I've got lined up to share some insights on.
Working together, the Watchers were not involved.
They were the ones who brought the Mistag boar to my attention in the first place. They weren't smuggling anything.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to all the folks shown here supporting me on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show directly and see your name here as well, head on over to patreon.com/KASICK.